Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take a very brief look at the board game Trains. This game is for 2 to 4 players, ages 12 and up, with the average playtime being about 45 minutes. Now, if I were to compare this game to anything else in my collection, I have to say that it was a cross between Dominion and Ticket to Ride, though it bears more of a resemblance to Dominion. Basically, in Dominion, you were building a deck of cards during the game in an attempt to earn as many victory points as you could. The same thing goes on here. The kicker is, and this is where the Ticket to Ride portion comes into play, you're actually going to be laying rails on the board and building your own little empire of sorts in order to earn more victory points at the end of the game. So let's just take a quick moment to look at the components and see how the game is played. Alright, now as far as what's in the box, the major component here are cards. There are over 500 cards, which are further broken down into various decks. Each of the decks do something a little different. Some allow players to buy other cards, some cards act as victory points for endgame scoring, some act as action cards that can be used during the game, different things like that. In fact, I pulled some aside here just to quickly show you. Let me see if I can focus in on these. These are your train cards. Think of them as your currency cards or coin cards that you may have used in Dominion if you've ever played that. These cards allow you to purchase other cards and rails for the board. You can see how much money they provide you in the upper left-hand corner, and you can see how much they actually cost in the upper right-hand corner. Now, these cards shaded in gold act as your victory point cards. Like in Dominion, there are 3 different types of victory point cards. You've got them valued at 1, 2, and 4, as shown in the bottom left-hand corner of the card. They don't really do much besides sit in your deck and just give you points at the end of the game. But they will make you draw these waste cards during the game, and I'll explain waste in a minute. Now, you've also got these lay rail cards. Basically, players will be able to lay rails onto the board using this card. Though, depending on where they place the rail, they may have to pay an extra amount of money depending on where they lay the rail. Each space on the board has different cost requirements. The regular plains, for example, doesn't have any cost, but like mountain areas and different things like that will require you to actually spend some of the money you may have gotten from these train cards. The Station Expansion card allows a player to purchase stations, which are in white here, and place them onto the cities, which are right on the board. And I'll show you the board after I'm done here. But for the most part, stations allow players ways to score victory points at the end of the game. Waste cards, I talked about this briefly when describing these other cards, but as players perform actions in this game, they'll be adding waste to their deck, meaning that these cards serve no useful purpose whatsoever. They just simply serve to sort of just mess you up and ruin your day. The more actions you take with some of these cards, the more waste you collect. So as you're building up your deck, you're going to be acquiring more waste, and you may have a hand that has 3 waste cards in it, and you're not going to do anything for your turn. Luckily, there are action cards that do combat this. For example, you've got these landfill action cards. Return all waste cards from your hand to the waste deck. So there are different action cards in the box that allow players to get rid of some of that waste. Now, there is one special card I would like to make mention of. This is the Tourist Train card. This is the only card that I've seen in the box that actually provides victory points during the game, hence why there is a score track along the outside of the board. I haven't run into any other card that will provide the player with victory points during the game. All of the victory points earned with these gold cards and all of the victory points earned by laying rails on cities with stations on them, all of that is earned at the end of the game. This is the only card that I've seen that actually awards them during the game. Whenever this card is played during a player's turn, they are allowed to move their score marker 1 space along the victory point track. Speaking of score marker, this is the last component I want to briefly touch on. Each player will use one cube of their color for the score track, while the others will be used for rails. Game setup is pretty easy. Each player will pick a color and place one of their cubes on the 0 space on the score track. Again, you're not going to be making real heavy use of this during the game unless the tourist train deck comes into play. Speaking of decks, you're going to have to seed your supply with 16 decks of cards, 8 of which are standard, meaning that they're always used in every game that you play. You've got your 3 victory point cards along the top: apartment, tower, and skyscraper. You've got your express train and limited express train cards. Those allow players to buy cards during the game. They're your currency cards. You've got your waste cards here, lay rails, which allow players to lay rails, and station expansion, you guessed it, allows players to place stations on the board. Now, as far as a player's starting hand goes, each player will take 7 of these normal train cards from the box, 2 of these lay rail cards from the box, and 1 station expansion card from the box, and that'll form their 10-card starting hand. As far as the other 8 decks are concerned, what will happen is those will be drafted based on a randomization process via these randomizer cards. Now, before I get into that, these cards I didn't touch on, but these are sort of just organizer cards for the box insert. In fact, let me show you what they look like. As you can see, these header cards, organization cards, are just a little bit bigger than their counterparts, allowing you to briefly, quickly go through this and pick out the deck you're looking for. I would have preferred the Dominion box insert, in all honesty. In Dominion, the box insert had slots for each deck and were organized via text along the side there. So I would have preferred that because these cards tend to fall over when the box is closed, but whatever. But getting back to this, what players will do is they'll take these randomizer cards, and basically it's one card for each of the decks in the box that aren't standard. And they'll pick out 8 of them, and then obviously you'll be doing that randomly. You'll be picking out 8 of them, and then those are the decks that players will be using for that game. Though if this is your first time playing, or if you're new to the game, you can use the landfill deck as one of those 7. Just pick out the landfill deck from the box and then just draw 7 cards. The landfill deck is a nice deck to use to help get rid of waste. Once players have the 16 decks set up the way they're supposed to, they'll take a cube of their color and place it somewhere on the board. It can't be on a C space or one of these spaces with the stars on them. Those are remote locations that award players points at the end of the game. After that, they'll go ahead and deal themselves 5 cards from their deck of 10. And on a player's turn, they can take as many actions as they want. Again, they can use these train cards to purchase other cards from the supply. Again, how much money that each card will allow them is in the upper left-hand corner. So in this particular case, a player could purchase a card from the supply valued at 2 or less. These station expansion cards allow players to place those stations somewhere on the board onto a city. And let me just do that right now. Let's say here, for example. Now, the number of stations a city can hold is shown right on the space itself. This can hold 2, this can hold 2, this can hold 1, this can hold 3. As far as laying rails go, players will be allowed to lay rails on the board, again, with these cubes. And again, it has to be adjacent, whenever they do that, it has to be adjacent to either their starting location or to an existing rail. So this would be okay, this would be okay, this would be okay. Now again, it's important to know that there is a cost associated with doing this. Certain spaces have different costs. These planes, for example, have no cost. So if you just were to play a lay rails card, you could place one of these cubes on the spaces without having to do anything. If you had a cube over here, again, this is not adjacent, but just for the sake of argument, if you were to place a rail here, you'd have to pay an extra currency or money in order to do that. Now, to pay it, all you do is just simply play one of these normal train or currency cards or train cards that are in your hand and reserve it for that particular action. Once a player is done playing the cards in their hands, they'll go ahead and take all of the cards that they've used, all of the cards that they didn't use, and all of the cards that they purchased, combine them and put them into a discard pile. In this case, the player played a station expansion card. They placed the station there on that space. You've got 2 lay rail cards, so they placed a rail here and here. Again, there's no cost to place a rail onto a city, so as long as there's no stations there. The cost of placing a rail on a city will go up depending on how many stations are there. You've also got these normal train cards. The player played 2 of them to purchase this conductor station. Now, as you can see, the card costs 2, and the effect of this card: discard any number of cards from your hand, draw 1 card for each card discarded. Now, it's important to note that you can't play this card immediately upon purchasing it. It'll just simply be placed off to the side for the time being and then placed into the discard pile, though you'll be able to use the card again once the deck refreshes. When a player's done taking their turn, they'll go ahead and draw 5 more cards from the supply. And let's assume for the moment that the other players have taken their turn. Let's just take another turn just as an example. You've got 5 normal train cards here, so that's a value worth of 5. So let's just say that the player wants to buy this Wagon Factory card, which is valued at 5. The card is trash a train card from your hand, gain a train card of a cost up to 3 more than the trash card, place the new card into your hand. What that means is that a player on a future turn could trash one of their normal train cards to gain this express train. Or a player could trash the express train card in sometime in the future to gain one of these limited express trains. Again, the values of these cards will go up. This is more expensive to buy, mind you, but having these cards in your hand will allow players to purchase the more expensive cards from the supply. At any rate, let's just say that ended their turn. There's nothing else they can do besides buy this. They'll place that into their discard pile, and now they don't have 5 cards to draw. So they'll take all of these cards in their discard pile and refresh their deck. Then they'll draw 5 more. And hopefully the cards that they've purchased will come up. Here's a good example. The Conductor Station, that's one that they've purchased on a previous turn, and now it is available for use on a future turn. And this will continue around the table until the game-ending condition occurs. Now, the game can end in one of 3 ways. If all of these stations from the supply have been used, then that'll end the game. If a player uses all of the cubes of their color, that will end the game. Or if 4 of the cards from the supply are all used up, excluding waste, that'll end the game. And what will happen at this point, players will earn victory points from a number of different sources. They'll earn victory points for having rails on cities that have stations on them. They'll earn victory points for having rails on places that are remote, which are notated by these stars with the point values listed right on them. And also they'll go through their deck, their entire deck, and pick out any of these gold cards that they happen to have. Again, these gold cards are the victory point cards. And you can see the number of victory points that are awarded here in the lower left-hand corner. Once players have done all of this, they'll compare to see who has the most victory points, and whoever has the most will win the game. And there you have it. That's just a very brief look at the game Trains. I didn't cover all of the rules found in the manual, but this should just give you a general overview as far as how the game is played. You can check out my full review at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com, or you can click on the link in the below description. That'll take you there as well. This is Vince. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.